Welcome to the Student Success Podcast. If you work in higher ed and want to learn ways to support students, check out today's episode.
So we talk about it directly in the class, and then again, trying to be transparent and helpful with them, I think does a lot to mitigate the fears around it. And so what I've found actually happens quite often in my class is students will come up to me and they're like, I did this part with AI, is that cool? And I'm like, yeah, or I'll say, probably it would be better for you to think this through on your own and then work it through. And they're like, oh, okay. So I had one student actually a few weeks ago, and she's like, I'm really struggling to find the line of like where acceptable use for me versus where I'm not learning. And I said, that's an awesome thing that you just said to me, because that already shows that you're considering what matters and what doesn't matter in your learning process, right? So being able to go through that. Am I working to help students learn, or am I working to, bust them on doing something wrong? And, we all know that the reasons for cheating have very little to do with like, I want to be a cheater. It's much more related to the stresses that they have and the, personal issues they've got going on. So are we finding ways to open up those real human conversations with them where they feel like they can talk to us about it?
Welcome to the Student Success Podcast, Brent.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Brent, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Brent Warner. I'm a professor of English as a second language at Irvine Valley College. I know a couple of my colleagues have been on the show before, so I'm excited and nervous to be next to them. They're great people. You had Professor Kaminsky on, as well as a few other people. So anyways, I teach at Irvine Valley College. I have spent a long time working in using technology for language learning, using tech to support students. So I'm kind of like a little bit of a techie nerd around, along with the language learning side of things. And so obviously that kind of tied in and got crazy with the artificial intelligence conversations over the last couple of years. And then I also do a couple of podcasts around similar-ish things. So like technology and language learning, technology in higher ed. And I'm happy to share links with you for that stuff later, but I'm just excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here, Brent. I've been following you on social media for a while, and I have a very close relationship with Irvine Valley, and it's just so nice to have you here. And what I wanted to focus on today, because I've noticed a lot of your posts have been around what you've been learning about AI, artificial intelligence, was wondering if we can learn from you, kind of some baseline knowledge about AI, and then further down the road, we can take it to a conversation around AI in teaching and learning, because there's a lot of camps that are kind of forming out of this. And I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on that. But and it's ever evolving, right? It's just exponential. So thus far, what have you learned? We'd love to get your insights.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with, it's impossible to keep up with the AI stuff. So if you're listening and you're like, oh, I'm feeling like I'm falling behind, I don't know anybody who's like, I'm on top of it. Even the biggest names and things are like, we can only do a few things. We can only take care of a few things. So don't worry if you're falling behind, or if you feel like you don't know what's going on. But kind of as you said, Al, there are a lot of different takes on the AI thing, right? A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people are gung-ho with it. I think I get a little nervous because I think I present myself as gung-ho all the time, but I also have a lot of very legitimate concerns. And I do occasionally share those things too. So it's like, hey, this is gnarly. This is scary. What happens if, irresponsible people get control of the information? And, I worry about things like, people are moving towards using AI for searches instead of, Google and human-made things. And so there's concerns on those levels. There are also really amazing opportunities for students to work with artificial intelligence to to challenge their learning and their understanding of concepts and how they're thinking about the ways that they're interacting. And I think the biggest thing that I kind of want to share over, just kind of conceptually, that I think is worth sharing and knowing about overall with AI, is that like all tools, you kind of get out of it what you put into it, right? And so you're going to see that there are people who have limited interaction with it and say that it's a limited tool, and you go, well, okay, but how much have you done this, how have you tried this thing? And then it's like, oh, I didn't know you could do that, or I didn't know that you could kind of customize it to do this other thing. And so so you kind of have to be flexible in exploring these things, and then also realize that we are in such early days with all of this. I think that's the other part that is tricky, because we all want to say, well, we want the answer, we want to know what we're doing and how to deal with it. And it's like, well, we can't deal with, I mean, we can deal with it as much as we know, but these things are changing so quickly that it's a little bit unfair to students, it's unfair to other faculty members to make solid decisions right now about what we're going to be doing for the next several years. We really have to be ready to pivot all the time.
Having to make decisions about AI, especially the classroom, what do you recommend, or what do you see evolving as a way for us to have more clarity around it, some realistic, thoughtful boundaries around it? Do you see, for example, is it best for each department to have kind of its own little AI work group, or campus-wide work group? Like, how do you see this so that it eventually lands in a syllabus? It eventually lands in how we have our students use AI.
Yeah. So I'm one of the co-chairs of our AI task force on campus, and so that is a question we're dealing with all the time. I think one of the problems with it is that we don't want to dictate to people what they must do in any situation. It's not my job to tell you what you do as a professor. I'm speaking only to professors at the moment, or faculty, but it's also to empower people no matter what they think. Hey, I love it. Hey, I hate this stuff. How do I deal with it? Because regardless of what we think as a teacher, whatever side or however in the middle you are on it, your students are going to be landing in all sorts of different places as well, right? And so we're not just able to say this is absolutely what it's going to be, because you could say you're blocking AI and your students just go, okay, well, I'll just go use one that you don't see me using, right? Or you could say I love AI, and you might have a students. I just met with several students recently who said we want to know every time our teachers are using AI and we don't like it in our classes, right? And so we're saying, okay, well, we're getting these different perspectives, and being so again, it's hard to make decisions in ways that are so specific to anyone's needs, that I think we're all going to have to kind of make these choices, what, yeah, kind of from the ground up. And so but also to be open-minded enough to say, hey, what I did this semester might not be the final answer. Maybe I'm going to try something different next semester, and if I don't like it, maybe I'll play with it again and see what the possibilities are next time around. And if I do like it, maybe I'll start to see what problems are coming. So I know I'm kind of covering the whole spectrum of like every possibility of answer, but really the truth is you need to work with your students on these. And so for me, the biggest part is being really transparent. If I want to explore these things, I definitely am talking to my students and telling them, hey, this is when I'm using AI, this is what I'm using it for. Let's talk about responsible use. And I think a lot of teachers are still kind of unfortunately not broaching the conversation with their students, and they're just kind of letting it go, with the assumption that students understand the differences between using it appropriately and not. But if the teachers don't know that, I think it's a struggle for this. I mean, it's definitely a struggle for students to know that. And so we are all responsible right now for kind of guiding that conversation and helping students figure out what that means. possible in 10 years, that as students have come through from, much longer experience of having used them, by the time they get to college, then okay, we kind of understand these concepts. But I tell my students right now, I'm like, you guys are the guinea pigs, like the guinea pigs, and that's a hard thing and a hard place for you guys to be. So let's work together and figure out what it means.
So back to this AI task force for a moment, then are you seeing in this task force over time maybe developing not a top down and this is what you have to do, but at least a set of guidelines? You said responsible use, right? That there's some faculty are not having conversations. So do you see a task force helping to develop something to as a resource for faculty to work with that?
Yeah, so we're building a best practices guide, and but the problem is we started building it with the big team, and we ended up with like 50 or 60 pages of stuff, and it's like, well, this is way too much. There's no way anyone's going to read this. So how do we shrink it down to 2 pages, right? And in a good, beautiful design that people will actually look at, right? So when you actually get the text, it's probably more like 1 page, maybe 1.5, right? And so we know that people aren't going to look and read an entire manual of things, but if we can kind of give them guides to say, like, hey, this is something that seems to be useful, that people respond to well. These are ways that you can open up the conversation with your students, and that's not to say it's making decisions on it, but it's about saying, hey, let's understand what we're expecting for these things. I'm sure you've seen things like the AI assessment scale, like, hey, don't use any, use a little bit, use more, and fully use it as part of your process, right? There's different approaches to opening these conversations. That's not the only one, right? Other people are saying, well, now that I recognize how my students are interacting with it, I'm having them, share with me what they're expecting and what they're wanting and what they're actually learning from. But I was also reading today an interesting article by Ethan Mollick, and he was talking about, a lot of us are creating these illusions of learning, right? And we're thinking, so students might be using AI and thinking that they're learning, but actually they've been using it as a crutch. And so even though they feel like they're learning, when they're tested afterwards, they're not necessarily showing what they've understood. It does go the other way. If they're trained and understand the processes, then they're actually learning more and getting better grades on assessments. And so it's a question of, like all things, is there a pedagogy behind it? Is there an understanding on how we're implementing these things? These studies are still coming in, and so we kind of have to kind of be aware of the changing tides and the shifts, and try our best to apply these things as we're working with our students through it. It is a lot, but it can be fun, right? Because I think when you're working with your students together through the process, it becomes a much more shared conversation, instead of just the burden of all responsibility is on you alone, which is heavy.
And Brett, how are you using AI? How are you leveraging it for your pedagogy, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I use it a couple ways. One, in my class, I have, so the very first assignment we do in my class, in my academic writing class for academic writing for multilingual learners, students write a paper, or a first day diagnostic type of exam, and I use it to give AI feedback. I say, I'm not even looking at it, let's just look at the feedback that you're getting from AI. And so they immediately know it's AI, and they start scanning through it, and I try to set up the prompt for AI to give feedback on them in a way that students would understand. So it'll be like, hey, give them information about this and this, but I'm not trying to say make it good or make it bad. But then the students can start looking, and immediately they're picking out things that the AI is giving to them, and they're like, oh, hold on a second, this is kind of weird, right? Like this, I know that, I use the example all the time. I know that I'm supposed to capitalize proper nouns, but it didn't tell me anything about the proper nouns, and I realized that I did it here. Oh, it's missing things. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for your learning, for if you're trying to use these things later on, right? So it's not me coming down and saying, you're you're bad for using this, or anything like that. It's more of an open opportunity for them to discover what comes out of AI. And so that's the first level of things. Later on, when we do writing assignments, I just started a new process where I have it give a feedback at the top of a document. So very specifically, I'm using Brisk. You click on Brisk and it can create this feedback based on your rubric. And so what it does in my rubric currently, I have 5 different categories that are gradable. And so then I say, hey, use these categories, use this rubric to create feedback that the students can use as talking points, so that when they go into the language lab to get help from a professor, we're lucky to have that kind of system on our campus. But then my students can go in and they can say, hey, here is a checklist of 20 things, 4 things from every all 5 categories, and I think I want to talk about this one from this category, I want to talk about this one from this category. So now they're able to go into the lab with a predetermined idea of what they're trying to get done, because they've already been given a little bit of feedback before they go and talk to the professor in the lab. Whereas before, and this has been a problem for us, at our school, at least for as long as I've been working there, which is the students come in and they go, check my paper, is it okay, right? And it's like, well, these totally decontextualized, stripped free questions, and it's not their fault. They don't know what to ask, right? They don't know what to see about their work. And so now that they're just being given little bumps, they can say, oh, okay, well, now I get a chance to start the conversation or start the ideas before I go in. And it may be right, it might not be right, but at least I'm able to start talking to the professor about those things. So you're starting off with a little bit of an AI kick and then bringing it back into the human side of things for them. That's one thing. Another thing that I do is I'm using Playlab, but there are some of these tools like Boodlebox or whatever that you can build the bots on the back end. So these are the agents, they call them, or the GPTs. They've got 100 different names. It's really annoying, but you can basically you can build the prompts on the back end, so then the students interact with whatever you've asked it to do. So I'm doing things like this. I do games for my students. So for example, in my class, because grammar is an issue and some of my students are still trying to master grammar forms, I have games where I set it up. So one of the games that I have is Shohei Otani's secret spy adventure type of thing, right? And so it tells the story of Shohei Otani moonlighting as a spy, and he's trying to do all these things. And what it does is it gives you a short paragraph, and it gives the students 3 verbs in the dictionary form of the verb, and their job is to then convert it into the past tense, right? And then it looks at what they did and it says, okay, you accurately did it, then the story will continue. If they don't accurately do it, then Shohei fails on that little part of the mission and is not able to continue to save the world or whatever else it is that he's doing. And so if you kind of turn these things into games or learning opportunities, that's kind of like choose your own adventure-ish style, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm moving through these steps, and then my successes lead to more success, possibly my failures lead to whatever, but they're not even really thinking about the grammar stuff so much. I mean, they're doing it and they're kind of going through, but it opens up fun opportunities for exploring, where they're saying, hey, this story's kind of cool, I get to see what happens, and not so much, okay, I'm just doing a workshop and a worksheet type of thing and checking off things on a list and writing the same word next to it with no the traditional paper versions that can't interact back with the students. And so you can get some real opportunities to make this a lot of fun for them. And it's still low stakes. It's like, did you do it? What did you find? You can kind of review things with them. They're not always 100% accurate, so I wouldn't do it for testing at this point, but for interactions for the students and for them. And I just did a very informal survey with my class, and they're like, let's do more of these things. These are fun for us. They engage us, right? And you can make all sorts of different customizations endlessly, kind of to the limit of your imagination.
And what program was that, Brent, that you used to do these customizations?
Playlab, playlab.ai. And the reason that I use that is because it is FERPA compliant, meaning that the data is not being trained on. So whatever the students write in there, and I still don't want them using, giving their private information, but I will say, like, hey, this at least we know from them, they're locking down the information, so anything that you say is not being trained on. You're getting the benefits of the AI stuff, but you kind of stay away from the potentially dangerous and scary stuff.
Oh, Brent, that's so cool. Where you're finding a way to embrace, and I would imagine it takes a lot of work at first, a lot of time and effort to put this together, create the prompts, but in the long run, it saves you time, actually.
Yeah, so then like once you start building these things, and Playlab is cool too because you can click a button and remix ones, and so it'll basically make a copy, and then you can go into the back end and say, oh, I want to change this. It used to be a past tense activity, and now I'm going to change it to a noun clauses or subject verb agreements. Again, speaking from my language world, right? But regardless of what subject you're teaching, you can do these kinds of things and really customize them and say, like, okay, how am I going to bring my students' understanding of the world with the content that I'm trying to teach? And there's a lot of ways to explore. And I think we're really just starting to scratch the surface on what people are going to do with it.
So I'm imagining myself, I'm a student in your class, and I'm understanding that, oh, okay, I get to use AI. He has structured it in a certain way. Do you have any language that deals with, and this has been the issue from the very beginning about how students may use AI for cheating, and then there's all these so-called AI detectors. And how do you deal with that? What kind of language do you use for students on that?
So we talk about it directly in the class, and then again, trying to be transparent and helpful with them, I think, does a lot to mitigate the fears around it. And so what I've found actually happens quite often in my class is students will come up to me and they're like, I did this part with AI, is that cool? And I'm like, yeah. Or I'll say, probably it would be better for you to think this through on your own and then work it through. And they're like, oh, okay. So I had one student actually a few weeks ago, and she's like, I'm really struggling to find the line of like where acceptable use for me versus where I'm not learning. And I said, that's an awesome thing that you just said to me, because that already shows that you're considering what matters and what doesn't matter in your learning process, right? So being able to go through that and have them reflect on their own learning and the value of it rather than having a bot do something. So I'll talk about those types of things, right? Like, hey, if you went to a golf course and you had a robot hitting the golf balls for you, are you going to say that you drove it? Sorry, I'm not a golfer, so I'm not sure what a good number is, but like, are you going to say that you drove the ball 200 yards or whatever else it is, right? And so then they're like, oh, hold on a second, what does that mean then for my learning, right? And so opening the conversations up like that in a more informal way, instead of putting hard, strict limits on it with, in the syllabus, you can have your syllabus language, of course, but it's it doesn't matter. Like, the syllabus is not a thing that students care about, right? They care about the relationship that they're building with their teacher and that what they're building with their learning. And so if whatever you have in the syllabus, you can say, hey, let's set this up. But if you're not talking with them and showing them the ways through it, then I don't think that it's particularly valuable, except just to have a record of what you've done. So, or what you've said that what rules you said that you're going to enforce. I guess that's probably a better way to say it. And again, do I want to be a police on this? No. Every teacher kind of has that same anxiety, is like, am I working to help students learn, or am I working to bust them on doing something wrong? And I mean, we all know that the reasons for cheating have very little to do with, like, I want to be a cheater. It's much more related to the stresses that they have and the personal issues they've got going on. So are we finding ways to open up those real human conversations with them where they feel like they can talk to us about it, versus, and I'll tell you, this has taken me a long time. Like I used to just be like a, you know, hard, like, oh, you didn't do it, you're done, right? Like, and so I've kind of had to build my own softening over the years too. And so it's not just like a, you know, hippy dippy, like we all love each other and that's all good, right? It takes me time, but then I'm saying like, well, what's actually the best thing for my students? What's really going to help my students? And this is moving away from the AI thing, but like that human connection with them is what then makes it easy for me to start having the conversations around what they're doing that is appropriate or not appropriate on certain levels.
Yeah, fundamentally, regardless of a policy, a technology, whatever it is, it always goes back to that basic human to human connection,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? To have that as the foundation is key to all of these innovations, right? So you using AI in so many cool ways for teaching and learning. I'm sure you've heard colleagues use AI for like, what are some of the things where you're like, oh my gosh, that's cool. I gotta, look into that soon.
Oh my gosh, these so these things happen all the time, you know. I mean, I think some of the interesting things are there are these new tools that are starting to come out that help students along with their writing processes, like the actual full on, and you know, they get little responses as they're going, and some of these things are, you know, made by you know, these companies out there that are building all sorts of things. And so I can't remember the name of it, but I just listened to I think it was who was it? Maybe Anna Mills on the Opposite of Cheating podcast. I'm not sure if you've listened to that one yet, but anyways, I think it was her. Anyways, sorry if I'm wrong, anyone out there listening, but basically the idea, hey, there are these tools out there that are really using students writing and analyzing it as they're going, but not giving them answers, but also kind of, you know, I kind of think of these things as like bumper bowling, right? Where it's like, hey, just let's just move a little bit this way to get back on track. Let's move a little bit that way to get back on track. And so I think that if we start seeing uh, AI use from these companies that is actually meant to help students grow, we're going to see a lot of really positive things. If we start seeing so many of these companies, which are just like these cheap wraparound services on top of, you know, these are the wrappers, right? It's just like, hey, basically it's ChatGPT, but it's got a different name and it's, you know, going to write your essay for you. Well, you know, like what value is that, right? And so so some of these things are, I'm excited to see when we see like ethical student focused companies building out. I am excited, but I think they're still in early stages. I think a lot of the hucksters started off earlier, and so we're going to do some time sorting those out. But regardless, I do have students that are playing with, or sorry, colleagues who are playing with things of like, hey, what level of translation for a really you know, more beginner level students might they need? Or you know, we're building out some of these things for some of our student centers where students can get help from bots that are letting them get the basic information that might have taken too long or been dug, you know, buried deep somewhere in the website. And so we say, well, use this website as a resource, and then when students ask questions, just answer them immediately. So we're playing around with some of those possibilities on campus as well, besides you know, classroom use, but looking at other ways to support students. And you know, we've seen it so many times where they're like, hey, I need help late at night and there's nobody on campus and there's nobody you know, on the library desk. What do I do? Can I get something better than the kind of old fashioned logic tree chat? And so we're trying to build some of those conversations as well.
Ethically focused companies, yeah, uh, not too many of those around, I think.
I know, and this is the part that kills me. So like, so this is what ends up happening is that we find these little, basically colleges, right? Like a small college department that's like, hey, we're going to build this thing out, but then they don't have enough funding for it or whatever else happens. And so it's always this kind of back and forth where it's like, hey, as soon as I find something that's made by professors or college, you know, teachers or, you know, whatever else it is, then I'm like, okay, let's explore that. And a lot of times they'll start off with making it free. Um, and they're not necessarily, aiming towards making a bunch of money. And so that's something that I try to look for, but that, a lot of the companies, as you're saying, they're like kind of hide it, or they put it behind, all these fancy numbers. And so again, as always, you kind of have to be diligent in your search. And then I really like this idea recently that a few people have been talking about, which is when you're reaching out to these companies, you're saying, well, what are you doing to support students, right? Like, you're making money on students, and now we're seeing, not to get too far into the crazy world that we're living in, but like, we're seeing students losing support all across the country and across the world. How are you as a company supporting those students that you are now making money off of, right? And being, are we willing to ask those questions of these companies and corporations and see what they're willing to do? Because if they're making millions and millions on these tools, what's the payback, right? How's it going both sides?
Right. The last, what, 5 or 6 years, there's been um, a lot of talk, a lot of discussion on reimagining grading. I'm sure you're very familiar with
Mm.
the whole, you can call it ungrading, or all these different kinds of ways to just talking about how do we rethink it. And I was wondering, from a grading standpoint, what are your thoughts on that and AI?
Yeah, so I think this is another thing that helps me get buy-in from my students, which is I do the ungrading thing, or limited grading, and so basically the vast majority of my assignments are pass no pass, right? You got the work, you got the minimum requirements for it, or you didn't. And so the way that works is that my students have unlimited times to resubmit their work. As long as they get it back to me within a week of my feedback, then they can get another submission and another submission all the way to the end of the semester. And so for the most times, most students will get it in 2 or 3 times, right? They're like, okay, now I see what's going on. But to me, I treat that as the opportunity for, like we talk about it, like the, shooting baskets, right? You're like, hey, you don't just shoot one basket and miss and say, I didn't get it, right? You keep on shooting, and you keep on practicing over and over and over again. And you don't also say, hey, I made it once. Obviously, I'm a pro basketball player at this point. Well, that's not true either, right? And so it's about that, saying like, hey, show that you got the skills, and then we'll move to the next spot over and try that again. So this is my process for the majority of my assignments with my students. And so when we're doing AI related stuff too, that all fits in, right? So it's like, hey, show me that you're practicing with these things, show me that you're interacting with it, what are you learning from it, let's take a look at your reflection on it. Did you really, was your interaction with AI useful for you in this conversation or not? Because again, my goal is to have them show their learning process overall. And when they're, whether it's AI or not, right? But they're going through those types of things, and so my whole approach, because of that, is a little bit different maybe than the way some other teachers might be dealing with things. But it does allow me the freedom to say, well, let's experiment with this thing and see what happens, right? And so we work it through that way. I do have friends who are doing things like, hey, I'm getting AI to give suggestions on where the rubric on this assignment might be. And then I'm using that as my starting point to alleviate the mental burden that comes with, tons and tons of grading, whether that's rubric grading or not. I think it's very cool. It's very interesting. It has, some problematic areas, of course, right? And we say, well, how much do we trust this, and how much are we double verifying all of these things? And so you have to kind of have a teacher who is dedicated to figuring those things out as they're going through. I'm not very comfortable with, just like click a button and AI will grade for you. That's not where I am. But I do like the idea of saying, well, what are the redundancies in work, or the things that are not really bringing value back to the students, and how can I use AI to reimagine the way that I'm approaching those things. And again, I don't have all the answers. I'm just starting. I just experiment, and so I think, Al, the things you've seen me post are like, hey, I'm testing this thing out. I try to be very practical with what I share, and it's not like right now we're talking a little bit heady, but I think most of the stuff that I share is like, this is exactly what I did. This is how I tried it. This is what the result was. And try it for yourself and see if it works the same way.
Yeah, I love that your approach is to students to show the learning process. And I think where a lot of faculty struggle with this is time and capacity.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a reentry student, I went to community college. I was very lucky that I found a pretty, I mean, he was a pretty fantastic math instructor. I believe he actually had a K-12 background. And when we had the quizzes, I found I was just astonished at this because it was so different from how I grew up. He said, I don't care if you get the answer right or wrong, but he would spend so much time
Mm.
because he wanted to see us through the whole problem, and he would give us points on our process and how we learned that. And yes, we get a bonus if we got it right, but he wanted to see our learning. And so I can imagine, but it will take some time to trust it to save time using AI.
Yes.
And so before AI, though, Brent, how did you find the time, or did you find that it wasn't actually a very large percentage of students who were turning in, the rewrites, and that's what made it manageable? I'm just wondering how you're able to manage that.
For my writing class, for example, my students write in Google Docs. And so we have, it's all inside of Canvas with the Google LTI thing, right? But we go into the Google Docs and the students do their writing process. And so I say, okay, you have to write every single letter of every single word inside of the Google Docs from the beginning to the end. There are tools out there. Unfortunately, they're starting to charge more and more, but there's a new one which is called process feedback, which kind of scans through it and gives an analysis of the writing process, and you can kind of watch a video of the students writing process if you need to do that. There I've talked about this for a long time. There was a tool called Draftback, which is also good, but they just started charging an annual subscription fee, and so I'm like, anyways. But so one, you can use that as a way to talk to students about how they write. It's not just about catching them, right, and saying like, oh, okay, you're doing these things, right? But it's like, hey, what are you doing in your writing process? I see that you're often writing at 3 a.m. Do you think that's the most productive writing time for you, or whatever else it is? So that's one part where you can have real conversations about what they're doing. The second thing is, as soon as they've turned in their first draft, you have them switch their writing from editing mode, which is your normal writing, to suggesting mode, which is essentially track changes on Microsoft Word. In Google Doc, it's called suggesting mode. So then the students go in and they start deleting words or adding in vocabulary or changing the phrasing or rearranging whatever. But all of that stuff gets shown inside of Google Docs. And so it starts getting messy very quickly because there's like, lines through words and, new words put in. But on the side, on the comments, it tells you, hey, this is what happened. And you as the teacher can then go through and click on the check mark and say, yes, I like this change. Or I can go right underneath it and talk to the student about why that change isn't necessarily a strong thing to do. And so then now we're working on a fully immersive and interactive document. This is not even AI stuff. This is just Google Docs, but you're now kind of doing a back and forth on a live document where they're starting to see their whole process and I can see what they're doing. And so it's like, oh, okay, now I see why you made this change. I suggested that you did this, but you chose to do it or you chose not to do it. Let's talk about what you did. So again, you can see that whole writing process go on with the students through this. and it definitely takes time. I mean, I'm not, like, not to say that you're going to zip through all of these things, but and I do have some benefits of having somewhat smaller classes, so I'm not like doing 200 students or 300 students or anything like that. I don't know exactly how I would adjust. I think AI comes into part of it. So Brisk, for example, does have a focused feedback option, which is kind of meant to do the same thing where it actually runs through the document and gives you feedback on sections. It's not as precise as I would like, because I will highlight a single period and make a comment on, like, hey, let's talk about why you put this period inside the quotation marks instead of after the parentheses as on your citation or whatever else it is. But Brisk will like highlight a whole line, or kind of talk about broader concepts. So as these things get better, I think it will be more possible for teachers with larger classes. But I do hope that classes like writing are not too large, because that's not really serving students very well either.
Google Docs, all right. 'Cause
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So use Google Docs is my answer.
imagine doing all this by hand back in the day. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, and people did that, right? It's like you'll write your little notes on it and you say wrong word or whatever else it is, but then you can't write back on top of that
Right.
over and over again, right? And so now the cool thing is students click a button, it's back in my hands. Now I can immediately work with it, and so that process does work pretty well.
So you're in what we would call the humanities, right?
Yes, more
Okay.
or less.
Have you happened to seen anything cool what your colleagues in, and let's say in STEM, have used AI by any chance?
A little bit. There hasn't been a we have people in STEM and in math who are exploring things and trying to figure things out, but they are still, well, again, with the tools that are generally available, they're finding that like AI does create unreliable information. Math, it still does weird things with like 2 + 2 = 5, don't you know? Right, I mean, not, it was that bad early on. It's still problematic, and there are ones, but I'm not as familiar with the math and STEM outputs. I know that there are some people who are trying to figure out what places they want to use them for, but I'm not 100% sure how that world is going. On the other hand, we're seeing all this stuff in the actual science communities where they're using AI for like trying to help solve diseases, and like doing all these hey, breakthroughs on cancer research and all these amazing things. So I would be very surprised if we don't see soon a pretty big shift into people going, wait a second, actually, if we're able to really solve medical problems, for example, let's take a real look at what this means for ways that we can teach and learn as well.
I read a research paper of how AI was actually more accurate in diagnosis than doctors, which fascinated me. Right? What a cool tool. As we kind of start winding down here a little bit, I was wondering about how do you use AI personally or for fun? We talked a lot about professionally for the classroom. Is there any ways that you use that, personally?
Yeah, a little bit. I do some, I do for fun. I do like image generation. I was a very bad Photoshopper. Well, not very bad. Sorry. I was an intermediate Photoshopper, I guess. Like I used to love like making like little fun jokes and things like that. And so now I'll do things like, instead of doing my own Photoshop, I'll build out images that are fun, that just silly things, of course, right? And there is some use that I use it for, every once in a while, novelty use, right? Like, hey, what should I cook today? I've got this in my fridge, or whatever else it is. Those kinds of fun things, and a little bit of things like planning out. I'm going to be flying to Japan, in the summer. Like, give me some ideas of places that I haven't been to, or whatever else it might be. But the truth is, like I said, I've got skepticism around some of these things as well. And so while I will play with them, I'm not a super hardcore user for my private life. I'm trying to get like, hey, tech is my working life thing, and I'm moving more towards like spending time in nature. But there are some cool things like taking a picture of a flower and saying, hey, what is this flower, and it gives you all the information on that flower. So I love those kinds of things. But I am trying to I was told recently we're not supposed to say this expression anymore. I'm not sure, but touch grass, right? Like, hey, get out there, just get connected to the world, breathe some fresh air, right? Like all those types of things. So, yeah. So I do like it, but I am slowing myself down and trying to be less of a techie in my private life.
Yeah, I think I saw you posted a marzipan cake of you.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
I tried it and oh, it didn't work out.
Did you upload your own photo for that, or did you prompt the whole
No,
thing?
I uploaded and said create a marzipan,
Oh, you tried it.
and it was no comparison to yours, man. Yours was really cool.
Yeah, that one turned out really well, and I was like, okay. And that was the first run at it. So doing things like that are totally fun and silly, and whatever. But yeah. So that one I uploaded my kind of profile photo that I have on LinkedIn or whatever, and it did a really good job of actually making it look like of me looking like an edible cake. It's ridiculous, but the other thing here too, Al, that I do want to point out is like we have to have some fun with this stuff. We can't take it all too seriously all the time. Like I totally get the concerns, and whether that's environmental or ethical concerns and all those things. And it's like, what an amazing thing to just be able to play with some of these things and have a little bit of fun. Every once in a while I'll do things like, let's try and make a comic and see what the comic looks like. Back when I was younger, I used to do, zines. I was into like the punk rock scene and all that. So it's like kind of bringing back some of my own just personal value creativity is it can be really a lot of fun, and then you share these things with your friends and have a little levity in life too is important. So I do recommend it.
Yeah, no, I've prompted to do a lot of funny things. I asked it to do a song about the committee structure at colleges.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
It's hilarious. And I've done within the family just really hilarious songs and prompts, and we would send to each other, and doing it in other languages. It's great fun. Now, speaking of, because I recall that you were in Japan for a year, right?
Hmm.
Do you have any insights of how they use AI there?
Yeah, so it's a little bit weird. One, Japan went all in. They're just like, use everything. There's no restrictions for anything. And so it was a very weird approach, especially for Japanese who are very rule based, in a lot of ways. But in daily life, I had friends with kids and all these things, and the conversations were not there, right? They weren't worried about kids using it, and it maybe they'll, again, it'll might catch up in a year or whatever else it is, but it wasn't a concern. It wasn't a thing that they're like, oh, they're going to be cheating or whatever else they're going to be doing with these things. It was just like a non-conversation. And when I would bring up AI, people just look at me like, uh-huh, okay. Well, let's go check out this other, whatever we're doing here, right? And so it was like not a lot of people, professors when I went to universities, they were definitely talking with me about it, but like the average Japanese family and the average Japanese person on the street was not, particularly interested, although there were definitely magazines and I saw books and all sorts of things out there. So the conversation is happening in some places, but it didn't feel like the massive swarm of conversation like it is in the States.
Yeah, and I would imagine because you teach students from so many different cultures, that has a particular way of how they look at AI as well in your classroom, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the last things I wanted to ask you about is imagine there's a formal mentoring program at Irvine Valley, and you are a mentor to 15 incoming faculty in your department. What would be your top three? Well, it doesn't have to be three. Whatever number you want, Brent. What would be the top tips, guidelines, whatever you want to call them, for their use in AI. These are first time teachers, knowing that they would have used AI as students. So what would you, as a mentor, what kind of guidance would you give them? Tips would you give them as they enter the classroom and here's AI?
That's a great question. So I think the first thing is I always say treat your classroom like a laboratory. That's for you and for your students, right? If we're really doing the best that we can for our students, we can't say that we know all the answers or how things are always going to turn out. And part of the learning process is failure, right? Things don't always work. We all have lessons that was like, oh, I thought this was going to be amazing and it didn't work out, right? I think a lot of people, and especially younger teachers maybe coming in, feel like a pressure to get things right all the time. And it's like, well, I would have wasted 2 hours if I did this wrong, right? And so whether it's AI or not, it's like, hey, give yourself the grace to be a teacher. If you are working to support your students, you will have more wins than failures over the process of things, right? So it's okay to experiment with these things and see what works and see what doesn't. To involve your students in the learning process, absolutely. If they are not part of it, if you're just dictating what they're doing, they're not going to be engaged with it at the end of the day, right? They'll feel like they're being forced to do something, even if it's something that they might like, right? They're like, okay, like I guess it's rules, right? And I think recognizing that, and I guess incoming students would understand this better than I would probably, but you're saying, hey, or sorry, incoming new teachers who are freshly out of university or out of their grad school programs might have a better sense of this, but saying like, hey, this is what this current generation is looking for, and this is what they value in their learning process, trying to understand that, and then also being willing to push back on it, because I think the other thing that happens is, hey, let's all do what the students want to get done and make sure that we're working and supporting their needs, but we also know as professionals, actually this works, actually this is what happens in the learning process. And so really being willing to apply those things and say like, hey, it's not just that it's my history, but that there is a long research of study, and using actual research and real information, that then we can say let's apply these ideas out to things, and not just. So the experiments are great if they're founded in research-based practices.
So, do you have any other parting words of wisdom, Brent?
No, I think it's just be respectful of where people are with the need of, or the fears and excitement around AI, right? I as much as I can, I always worry that people feel like I'm pushing an agenda on one side or another, and I really, my biggest goal is that people just open their mind to what possibilities there are, and that could be positive or negative. And so I think that as we're talking to other people, it's very tempting to push our thoughts on them. This isn't all things, but around the AI conversation, like, how do we be respectful of each other? How do we open up these conversations even when we disagree, and keep moving forward for the betterment of our students? If you keep that question at front of mind, I think you'll build good relationships with your colleagues. I think you'll build, good relationships with your students, and hopefully you'll see more success as you keep moving down the line.
Beautiful. So, thank you for participating in the Student Success Podcast, Brent.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you asking me, and I hope that at least one thing that's my other thing, is try to learn one thing, right? When you get a learning session, you don't need to take away 100 things. If you got one thing out of it, that's a good use of time. So I hope that there was one useful thing inside of there.
Oh, I'm sure there is. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Student Success Podcast. You can subscribe to the show and newsletter on the Continuous Learning Institute link below, and of course on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.